Hello, Serious Survivor here. This is the first video in a series discussing the steps we must take to prepare for the upcoming election and what will surely follow. This video will focus on different types of food and resources, or at least what we can do now to prepare. There are several topics that I want to discuss on this issue that need to be discussed, and I will dedicate one video to each subject. If the upcoming election is as tumultuous as we may expect, then things can take an even sharper turn for the worst when that day comes. With rioting increasing exponentially and looting becoming even more commonplace, many believe this will be the continuation of not only major civil unrest, that this could rapidly develop into a scenario in which riots and looting actually become what may be called the Second American Civil War. Whether full-blown civil war erupts or not, there are still many issues we must prepare for. As the civil unrest increases, the supply chain will, without a doubt, be interrupted to a degree that we haven't seen before. Truck drivers will not be able to deliver the goods, or they may outright refuse to take the risk. Stores will board up in fear of the rioting and looting to come. This is why it's so essential at this stage to prepare while we can. At this moment, food and water resources are still readily available, and this is the time we need to act. If you haven't already, then food stocks and water should be first on your list. Without these, eventually nothing else will matter. The first category are long-term freeze-dried foods. There are many of these on the market, and they range from the 5-year meal replacement bars to the long-term MREs to 25 to 30-year freeze-dried food packages. Depending on what type we look at, some are small packages and can be stored very easily, while others come in larger buckets or pails, which in turn does make them easy to stack and store if you have the space. There are some benefits to these because the convenience of having prepackaged meals can be of extreme benefit in a survival situation. These are generally somewhat nutritious, and they usually have a good caloric intake. The benefits of these are their portability, and the packets are very small. One of the disadvantages is the cost. It's going to cost a lot more to stockpile freeze-dried food than it does to stockpile canned goods and to basically can or store your own food. Another disadvantage to these is the water usage, the water consumption. All of these meals will require to be hydrated. You're going to have to boil water, and you're going to have to pour it in the packet, and you're going to have to prepare the meal. Now, some companies such as Mountain House and Wise, their food can be saturated with cold water, although it's not going to taste as good. But in a survival situation, it's not the taste we're looking for, it's the nutritional value. I personally have a lot of these, and I do recommend these for those that can't afford them and those that can't access them. They're becoming a lot more difficult to obtain these days. But if you have these types of food buckets or food storage and you've opened them before, you'll see that the companies use basically the same buckets for all of their products. Some may be a little larger, some may be a little smaller. But if you order a month's supply as opposed to a 60-day supply, then you're going to see that that bucket is only halfway full. And that's one of the things that I take advantage of. And I open my buckets and I put all of the same types of food into the same bucket, and that definitely decreases the amount of storage space that I need for these. And it also gives me a few empty buckets that I can use to collect rainwater or for other needs that I may have in a survival situation. One of the things I do recommend, or at least I think is a good idea, is that when I do purchase these buckets, I immediately open them and I take each individual package out, because they'll come in these small Mylar type bags, and I'll put each bag into its own thick Ziploc bag, and then I'll repackage it into the bucket. And the reason I use a Ziploc bag is because this serves more than one purpose. If the package were somehow damaged, then it prevents the contents from spilling on everything else in the bucket. It also gives me a convenient storage method for each of the packets if there are any leftovers. Canned food. Canned food is plentiful right now, and it's not very expensive. This is something that we can easily acquire within the next 2 hours if necessary, with just a trip to our local supermarket or even convenience store in some cases. There are major advantages to canned food, and one of these advantages are it doesn't require water. So if we think about a true survival situation, civil unrest, something that interrupts social services, we may very well lose water supplies. And if that is true, then having freeze-dried food or food that requires hydration is not going to be of much benefit to us. And that's why I believe canned goods should be an essential part of everyone's preparations for a bug-in situation. Also with canned goods, you can go with the prepared meals such as beef stew, vegetable soup, things like that, things that actually have a high caloric intake and a lot of nutrients and a lot of fats in it too. Because in a stressful situation, we're going to be burning off a lot of fat, we're going to be burning a lot of calories. And this is going to make things easier if we have meals that we're already used to eating that we actually like. A lot of the other types of meals we talk about, they will sustain us. But when it comes to canned goods, a large portion of the public right now eats a large portion of their meals straight out of cans. So this is something that we wouldn't miss a beat, basically. Our bodies are not going to have to adjust to a completely new diet. Because that's one thing that people may not take into consideration is when I go from eating prepared meals at home to these freeze-dried meals, my body is going to impact my body in ways that I'm not expecting it to. So having these mixed in with our preps will make that transition a lot easier. Another benefit of canned goods is it takes the smell out of cooking. If I take a freeze-dried meal and I put it in a pot and I put some water in and I boil it, then that scent is going to permeate the air around me. Other people are going to smell that. So with canned goods, this basically takes the smell because we can open the can and we can just eat it the way it is if necessary, and this will not draw unwanted attention to us. So this is a major advantage, being able to eat directly from the can, because it reduces the smell or scent that permeates the area when food is cooked openly. But one thing to ensure is that we do have adequate means of opening cans. An electric can opener only functions with power, of course, so we need to have at least 2 or 3 manual can openers for the cans that don't have pull tabs. You can also opt for the older style church key can opener, and these are really good because they don't fail. They're going to work every time. One disadvantage is the amount of trash that will accumulate from canned goods. Long-term self-preservation means what we're going to look at here are different processes that can be used to preserve food at home without a lot of specialized equipment. Some of these processes will require a little specialized equipment, and we're going to look at multiple processes here. There will be links in the description below so that you can study these processes in depth if this seems like it would be something that appeals to you. Canning. The first is canning. Canning is an important, safe method of food preservation if done properly. The canning process involves placing foods in jars and heating them to a temperature that destroys microorganisms that could be a health hazard or cause the food to spoil. Canning also inactivates enzymes that could also cause the food to spoil. Air is driven from the jar during heating, and as it cools, a vacuum seal is formed. The vacuum seal prevents air from getting back into the product, bringing with it microorganisms that could contaminate the food. To safely home can foods and prevent home-borne illnesses, research-based, tried and true canning methods should be followed. Botulism is the most commonly associated foodborne illness with home canned products. Proper methods are provided in the links below in the description. There are 3 safe ways of canning depending on the type of food being canned. These are the boiling water bath method, the atmospheric steam canner method, and the pressure canner method. The boiling water bath method is safe for fruits, tomatoes, and pickles, as well as jams, jellies, and other preserves. In this method, jars of food are heated by completely covering them with boiling water at 212 degrees Fahrenheit at sea level. High acid foods with a pH of 4.6 or less contain enough acid that the spores can't grow and produce their deadly toxin. High acid foods include fruits and properly pickled vegetables. These foods can be safely canned at boiling temperatures in a boiling water bath. Tomatoes and figs have pH values close to 4.6. To can these in a boiling water bath, acid in the form of lemon juice or citric acid must be added. Atmospheric steam canning. The steam canner must be used with naturally acidic or properly acidified foods that have a pH less than or equal to 4.6. This includes most fruits, preserves, and pickled vegetables. The steam canner is not for low acid foods such as vegetables and meats. In the past, there wasn't enough research about atmospheric canning to recommend it to be produced safely at home. But in 2015, Dr. Barbara Ingham with the University of Wisconsin, in collaboration with the National Center for Home Food Preservation, published a study on the use of steam canners. The results of this study provided information and practices that should be followed for the production of safe foods canned in a steam canner in place of a boiling water bath canner. In steam canners, the prepared jars are set in a rack above a reservoir of water. The steam created from the boiling water provides the thermal treatment to the jars. There are several advantages to using a steam canner. A steam canner uses less water, it reaches processing temperatures faster, and requires less energy. Pressure canning methods. Pressure canning is the only safe method of canning low-acid foods, those with a pH of more than 4.6. These include all vegetables, meats, poultry, and seafood. Jars of food are placed in 2 to 3 inches of water in a pressure canner and then heated to a temperature of at least 240 degrees Fahrenheit. This temperature can only be reached in a pressure canner. But keep in mind that this process can be dangerous sometimes, as extremely high pressures can build, causing the device you're using to actually explode. Vacuum sealing. This may be one of the most effective ways to elongate the shelf life of your food. Air can be one of the greatest enemies to your food, as compounds have a significant effect on the food's taste, its quality, its integrity over a period of time. Vacuum sealing is ideal for foods that need to stay moist, as an airtight environment means juices cannot escape or be impacted by the air. This type of preservation can prevent solid foods like brown sugar and flour from getting hard, as they cannot absorb moisture from the air. Vacuum sealing does exactly what it sounds like. It seals the contents of a plastic or mylar type of bag through a vacuum. After placing your food in a sealable bag, a vacuum sealer removes the air and leaves the item intact for long-term storage. Other preservation methods, such as canning, salting, and drying, offer unique benefits depending on the type of food you're trying to save, but vacuum sealing is effective for the vast majority of items. Freeze drying. This is a process that can be done at home, but does require specialized equipment that is a little bit on the pricey side. But freeze drying is a special form of drying that removes all moisture and tends to have less of an effect on a food's taste than normal dehydration does. In freeze drying, the food is frozen and placed in a strong vacuum. The water in the food then sublimates, which means basically it turns straight from ice into water vapor. Salting. We know that water in food can cause microorganisms to grow, which makes the food more likely to spoil. Using natural preserving agents such as sugar and salt, the water available can be chemically reduced and prevent the spread of microorganisms. Salt and sugar are food additives which have been used for this purpose for thousands of years. Actually, bacon was already being preserved by salting in ancient Rome, where the salting tub was an essential part of every household who wanted to maintain their own provisions. Egyptians used earthenware jars for salting, and the Gauls used wooden kegs. Later in the Middle Ages, most kitchens had a wooden salting chest. In pre-industrial times, over 2/3 of the world's salt supply was used for these purposes. Water in food is present more often than not. The greater the water availability, measured by the water activity or AW scale, the more microorganisms that can develop and the more likely the food is to spoil. Drying food reduces the amount of water, but adding sugar or salt acts in the same way by binding the water in the food. A 10% concentration of salt acts on the pH of proteins and inhibits the growth of a large number of germs. However, it has an adverse effect on fats, causing oxidation and rancidity. Meat is salted using a mixture of salts, including saltpeter and sugar. The sugar counteracts the salty taste and provides the bacteria with energy to transform the nitrates in saltpeter into nitrites. Salting is often followed by another treatment such as smoking or drying. Drying. Methods of drying food. Dehydrators are probably the most common and reliable and fastest method for dehydrating the majority of your food. These produce the best quality product as compared to the other methods of drying. Most food dehydrators have an electric element for heat and a fan and vents for air circulation. Oven drying. Oven drying takes 2 to 3 times longer to dry food than a dehydrator. Drying in an oven is slower because ovens do not have the built-in fans for air movement, and the oven uses a great deal more energy than a dehydrator will. To use your oven for drying, make sure your oven can go as low as 140 degrees Fahrenheit, or use the keep warm setting. If the thermostat does not go this low, then your food's going to cook instead of dry. An oven thermometer can be placed beside the food in the oven to get an accurate reading of the actual temperature. Leave the door propped open 2 to 4 inches and place a fan near the outside of the oven door to improve air circulation. Sun drying. Sun drying requires the right environment. A warm, dry environment with somewhat consistent temperatures through the day and night. Foods dried in the sun can take 3 to 4 days to dry. If the humidity is high though, the food will mold before it dries. Sun drying requires constant exposure to direct sunlight during the day and a relative humidity of less than 20%. These conditions are found in areas like the Sacramento Valley of California or in Arizona or other dry Midwestern states. Air drying. Air drying differs from sun drying since it takes place indoors in a well-ventilated room or similar. Herbs and hot peppers are the most common air-dried items. Herbs and peppers do not have to be pre-treated, but simply strung on a string or tied in bundles and suspended until dry. Enclose them in paper bags to protect them from dust or other pollutants. Microwave drying. This is a quick way to dry very small quantities of herbs or some leafy vegetables, but it is not successful for most other foods. To dry small quantities of herbs in a microwave, place no more than 4 or 5 herb branches between 2 paper towels and microwave for 2 to 3 minutes. Remove the herbs. When cool, check to see if they are dry and brittle. If not, repeat the process for 30 seconds until they are dry. This is one of the most least effective ways with the least amount of options that we have since we're simply limited to a few types of herbs. Smoking. Smoking as a mode of food preservation is probably as old as cooking with fire. Heat and smoke will infuse a unique flavor into fish, ham, poultry, and other types of meat. It can also prevent the growth of microbes. Even though smoking done right is a very effective form of food preservation, we still have to be careful to avoid contamination and foodborne illnesses by following our proper procedures. The types of smoking. Smoking can either be done hot in a kiln or smokehouse for a short period or cold over low heat for up to 24 hours. Hot smoking preserves food in 3 ways. Heat kills microbes. Chemicals found in the smoke, including the formaldehyde and alcohols, these act as preservatives and the food dries out so there's less moist area for bacteria to grow. Cold smoked foods are typically preserved in some other way like fermenting, salting, or curing before the smoking process begins. Even with additional preservation steps, cold smoked foods should be cooked to an internal temperature of 160 degrees Fahrenheit before we actually eat them. So that was an overview of a lot of the different things that we can do to prepare, a lot of the different options that we have, I should say. Want to say thanks a lot for watching. Got a lot more coming out. Going to be talking a lot about what's coming up in this nation. So God bless. And for now, Serious Survivor, out.